Thank you. Thank you, guys. Well, Vicki and I were traveling in the West, and some of those pictures you saw up there were not pictures we taken, but were the same pictures that we were seeing. Those arches, the stone arches. We went through Arches National Park and did some things like that. But the most exciting news of everything was when we got back home on Friday, when I was listening to my conservative religious program that I listen to every once in a while. And I had not listened to it for a month, and I really realized I didn't miss it. But they were pretty excited about something, and they were going on and on about the fact that Christianity was in trouble and America was in trouble. And what they were talking about is the Supreme Court ruling on the fact that every American has a right to marry anybody they want to marry. Amen. And that's good, right? Well, one of the things is that I looked around, and a blog was sent to me by a Protestant minister who, or was sent to me that was from a Protestant minister, and he said this, and it was in Raleigh, North Carolina. A little more than a week ago, our government, well, he said today, our government reminded all of its people that you can't legislate morality, but you must legislate equality. That no one's theology gets to trump the inherent value of all people who call our land home. This should be welcome news for all of us, regardless of our faith tradition. You see, today, America finally came through for the LGBT people, who now have full access to loving, lifetime relationships. Some of the folks I was listening to were saying again that, that this was all about, this ruling was all about Christianity's defeat, or marriage's destruction, or America's moral decay. And I would say that it instead is about America's understanding and recognition of equality. That it was all about a glorious revival in our country built upon the intrinsic value of all people. If anything, I think marriage is stronger today. And what people were saying is we do not want to turn our backs on marriage. We don't want to change marriage. We want to embrace marriage. And when all people are embracing it, it makes it stronger. So that we can say to whoever we love, I will live my life with you. I will commit my life to you. Through all circumstances, in all ways. And because I'm willing to do that, I have all the rights of any married couple anywhere in America. You know, this whole process means that America is freer today. And we're going to become more and more free over time. There are other issues that are going to come up, other issues that are being worked on, that may have to go through the courts to get straightened out. I'm going to talk about some of those in the Hot Topics series that I'll be doing starting the end of July. But this is the one today, and it took time, it took effort for this to take place. What happened really is that we went through the process that we always go through for wonderful change. And that it takes the ingredients of self-examination, it takes courage, it takes resolve, and it takes love to make these changes. One of the things that happened with this change is that it was done through a process we call nonviolence. The only violence that ever came about were those who were against it, not those who were for this change. And I think that's a tribute to each and every person who engaged in this change. And it proves, once again, that power of nonviolence, that power to really want to be free, that drive within each and every one of us to be free. And you know, as we look at that as a process, as we look at what happened, it really happened because individuals changed their consciousness over time. That somebody had the idea that everybody should have the right to marriage. And then somebody else got the idea, and then it grew. And eventually the majority of Americans, as polls have shown, got that idea. And it's because we do want to be free. We innately are born in spirit to be free. And what I'd like to do is kind of look at this from a more personal perspective. But before we do so, many of you have probably seen the movie Amistad. It was directed by Steven Spielberg. It was introduced in 1997. It was a movie about a group of Mindy tribesmen who had gone to Cuba legally. There were about 100 of them, and they were working in Cuba. And they were captured in Cuba and turned over to a slave galley and were going to be shipped to America. On the way there, a number of them died, which was not uncommon, and their bodies were thrown overboard. And that caused a revolt, if you would, on board. It caused a mutiny. And what happened is that those who were trying to be brought into slavery, those Africans, took over the ship, and they left 2 navigators alive so they could take them back to Africa. But they got tricked, and those navigators took them into Boston Harbor. And those 44 people were arrested for mutiny and for treason. The movie goes about the trial, and the trial took place in Boston. They won their freedom, but it went appealed to the Supreme Court. Interesting concept. And this little clip that I want to share with you is what John Adams, our former president, said before the Supreme Court in 1841 in regards to this particular circumstance. A true story, and these were his words. So listen to these words.
As far back as one chooses to look, to ancient times, to biblical times, history bears this out. In Eden, where only two were created. Even there, one was pronounced subordinate to the other. Slavery has always been with us, and is neither sinful nor immoral. Rather, as war and antagonism of the natural states of man, so too slavery, as natural as it is inevitable. Now, gentlemen, I must say I differ with the keen minds of the South and with our president, who apparently shares their views, offering that the natural state of mankind is instead, and I know this is a controversial idea, is freedom. And the proof is the length to which a man, woman, or child will go to regain it once taken. He will break loose his chains. He will decimate his enemies. He will try against all odds, against all prejudices, to get home. Singhay, would you stand up if you would? So everyone can see you. This man is black. We can all see that. But can we also see as easily that which is equally true? That he is the only true hero in this room. Now, if he were white, he wouldn't be standing before this court, fighting for his life. If he were white and his enslavers were British, he wouldn't be able to stand. So heavy the weight of the medals and honors we would bestow upon him. Songs would be written about him. The great authors about time would fill books about him. His story would be told and retold in our classrooms. Our children, because we would make sure of it, would know his name as well as they know Patrick Henry's. Yet if the South is right, what are we to do with that embarrassing, annoying document? Declaration of Independence. What of its conceits? All men created equal, inalienable rights to life, liberty, and so on and so forth. What on earth are we to do this? What on earth are we to do this? I have a modest suggestion. As far back as one chooses to look, to ancient times, to biblical times, history bears this out.
We have circumstances in our lives that create a sense of slavery within oneself. We have circumstances in our lives, we have thoughts, we have core beliefs sometimes that create within each of us bondage rather than freedom. And until we are able to release those, none of us will be totally free. Unity is all about a movement for individual freedom. It's all about how to move ourselves from a state of self-imposed and sometimes other imposed slavery or bondage into a state of total freedom. Emily Cady, in her book Lessons in Truth, which is a unity primer, says every person believes he or she is in bondage to the things of the flesh. Most of us were taught that as children. Most of us were taught that as young adults. And at some point in our lives, we decided maybe that isn't true. Maybe we are worthy of God's love. Not love because we're not worthy. Maybe, just maybe, God dwells within us instead of out there somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, God is unconditional love manifesting in the universe. A whole different way of changing. And yet, to move into that change, it takes some work. You know, if we look at our Bible and our Bible stories, both in the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, what we find is that there are a lot of stories about our struggle for freedom. And all of them can be taken back to the individual circumstances. Most of us remember Joseph. And Joseph and his brothers sold him into slavery, sent him to Egypt, into the darkness, is what that means. And while he was there, Joseph, through acts of nonviolence, through intelligence and through love, was able to work his way out of slavery and into freedom. Because he trusted, as it says, in God. And it's interesting that when his brothers came back to him, not knowing who he was, when they finally found out who he was, Joseph said to them, "You did this out of evil, but God did it for good." You see, when we look through the evil, we can find the good, because we are starting to free ourselves. Moses, my goodness gracious, 120 years he spent getting ready and then taking the children of Israel out of Egypt and into the wilderness and across the Jordan eventually. But an interesting thing about that story is that they didn't know how to accept their freedom. Did you know, if you read the Bible, you'll find in about 2 to 3 weeks they got to the River Jordan. But they weren't ready to go over because their consciousness had not yet gotten there. They couldn't accept the fact that they were free. They still found themselves enslaved. So it took a whole generation, supposedly, for them to release that, let that go, and for people, the children of Israel, be ready to move across the Jordan. Paul. I don't always agree with Paul. Nobody says I have to. But where I do agree with him is when he talks like this, 2 Corinthians. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Now, if we firmly believe that God is within us, then there must be freedom within us. If we firmly believe that God's Spirit is within us and that we are created, then there must be this opportunity for us to grow and feel and be free. We do not have to be, if you would, captured by all the stuff that goes on in our life. And it does go on because we're in the human condition. Ernest Holmes said, "So man must be created with the possibility of limitless freedom and let alone to discover himself. Let alone to discover himself. On the road to self-discovery, he must be subject to the law of reality. And if in ignorance he violates this law, he must thereby suffer. This is not, however, because any divine decree ordains suffering, but simply because it is necessary, it is not necessity of the case. God never intended man to suffer. Suffering may be salutary in that it leads us to a place where we learn that it is unnecessary. We shall cease to suffer as we are more and more complying with the laws of the universe. All suffering is a result of some infringement of these laws. Phineas Quimby, one of the early founders of New Thought, said the reason we suffer is because we've been taught all our lives that we are useless, unworthy, undeserving, and that God just loves us that way anyway, when the truth is just the opposite. We are deserving. We are good. We are just moving through this consciousness, this experience to grow some kind of way. I don't know why. I have no idea. But I believe that with all my heart. That we are here in relationships to learn from one another, to grow from one another, so that we can find our freedom and experience that freedom. You see, we are born free. We had a little baby, 2 months old, in the congregation at 9 o'clock service. Really cool. You know, that little fellow wasn't worried about anything. He was just as calm as could be. He enjoyed himself. He wasn't worried about if his mama said something bad about him. He wasn't worried about what you thought about him. He didn't worry about what I was saying. Matter of fact, he ignored what I was saying. And he's probably better for it. But anyway, he was free. He really is free. And small babies are initially free. And then as we grow, something happens because we start to take on things from the world. We start to forget that we are consciousness first. I heard Eben Alexander last Saturday night talk about Proof of Heaven. This was sponsored by Unity of Bonaire and by Bon Secours Hospice. About 1,000 people were there. Isn't that cool? But you know, I heard Eben Alexander, maybe 4 years ago, over at Presbyterian Church. And it was a couple years after he had this experience. And I'm not going to go through experience, so you need to read the book. But anyway, what happened is that I saw the growth in this man, from my perspective. When he talked about that circumstance and what he went through and how he experienced what he called the outer body experience for heaven, what he started to 3 or 4 years ago, he was trying to explain it. He was confused by it a little bit, it seemed like. He knew it happened. He knew it was contradictory to some of the things he believed and some of the things he'd been taught as a child, but he didn't quite know how to put it into words other than talk about the experience and say, all I know is that everybody was accepted there. This week when he talked about it, he talked about consciousness. That many scientists say there's no consciousness, but the truth is there is consciousness. That there is consciousness before we come into the world, and there's consciousness when we leave this body and go into our next experience. That consciousness is what frees us. And that our job is to grow in consciousness, grow our consciousness, grow in such a way that we come to understand we are spiritual beings. And we are, and you've heard it before, spiritual beings, having a spiritual experience in the human condition. And therefore, everything in the human condition is sacred. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But it is, if we want it to be. And if we don't think it's sacred, then what we do is we get into our stuff and we become the victim, sometimes we think. And we get in pain, and then we start to suffer. And then all of a sudden, if we're not careful, it becomes our story. It becomes our drama. We're not willing to let go of it sometimes. But what we know is that we turn within when we're willing to do the work, when we're willing to look at our face in the mirror, so to speak, and self-examine ourselves and say, what does my world really look like and why? Then we're able to do that work of moving forward, of finding our freedom. We're able to do all of that. You see, bondage means the state of being bound or subjected to some external power. That's the definition of external power, something outside myself. And that can only be an illusion. That can only be self-imposed. Or freedom is being emancipated from external power and control. And what am I talking about? External power and control. Well, what we can learn to do is move out our bondage in ways in which we get within ourselves and let go of that which is outside of ourselves. When we're doing our work, what we learn to do is move from the freedom of the freedom from non-forgiveness to a freedom of forgiveness. Very important. And we forgive ourselves first. We live from the freedom and let go of the ego and step into the I am, the Christ within, my divinity, the Buddha within, whatever you'd like to call it. It's all the same. We identify with that which created us, that source and that force that did so. We move from our illusions into the freedom of truth. We all have illusions, and why do we have them about ourselves? Because at some point somebody said, Richard, you're not too smart and you can't learn very well. And I believed that for about 15, 20 years. After I was 15 years old, okay? And I had to teach school to find out that I had an above average intelligence, and that's not a bragging, it's just I realized it. But I didn't know it before then. So what happened is, you don't want to see my college transcript, okay? Matter of fact, I don't even want to see it. But when I finally learned that I could learn, I go and get my master's, and as you know, you have to have a B average to do that, and I was able to do that because I had more confidence in myself. It had nothing to do with what somebody told me at once in my life that I started to believe. That was an illusion, and so I was willing to let it go. Does that ever give you freedom? Ever give you freedom when you understand that something's been said about you no longer is the truth, and it never was the truth. It was somebody's idea of the truth. We are freed, if you would, from self-imposed laws. All of us are created in such a way that and trained, if you would, in such a way that we are domesticated, that as we grow up, we are taught certain rules and regulations, and we create our own too, by the way. And it's called the Book of Laws that lives within us. And boy, when we get out of alignment with one of those laws, we incriminate ourselves. We judge ourselves. And we're not willing to let go of that sometimes. So we feel like we are less than we truly are. We have to change the Book of Laws. We have to tear it up, as John Adams did, those Book of Laws, because they don't do us any good. We need to examine them. And when we examine them, we become free from self-judgment, from self-incrimination. And we even can learn to be free from suffering. Oh, pain goes with the human condition. I'm sorry to say that, okay? Because you're in unity doesn't mean that you're not going to have any pain. Wish I could do something about that, but I can't. But it means that I can manage the pain in such a way that it doesn't turn into suffering and it does not become a description of who I am. It's just an experience that I had that helped me grow. And I can make that choice to do that. And so, the last thing I just wanted to mention here of those freedoms is also we had the freedom from being politically correct. I want to say that. Politically correct. That's a pretty popular thing. And what do I mean by that? I mean we can be authentic and we can be loving and caring, and what we say brings equality. What we say brings an understanding that we all are equal. What we can say brings an understanding that we are all one. And I don't have to be politically correct when I understand that. I can be authentic. I can be myself. I don't have to worry about looking up something and how do you say this. It's really important for us to have that kind of freedom as far as I'm concerned. And we get it, again, as we move along this road towards our freedom. Self-examination. The courage to change, the ability to say yes to a higher truth and no to that which is in my way. It's a process. It is a path we follow. It happens within the individual, and it happens and spills out and manifests itself on the national and international level. But it starts with each of us. We have that opportunity to be truly free, to feel joy, to experience life more abundantly. But the one ingredient we have to do that is desire. We have to desire it. We have to want it. This last clip is also from Amistad, and it talks about the desire for freedom.
I do see that the cargo weight changed. They reduced the poundage, I'd see. That is all.
Simple, ghastly arithmetic.
Same inventory, Captain, and I'm
Well, for you, perhaps.
I don't see where it says...
I may need a quill and parchment and a better imagination.
On May 10th...
And what poundage do you imagine the entry may refer to, sir? A mast and sails, perhaps?
It is free.
Give
I do see that the cargo weight
us
changed.
free.
They reduced the poundage, I'd see. That is all.
Give us free. Give us free.
Your Honor, please instruct the defendant that he cannot disrupt these proceedings with such out...
Give us free.
If we are to have any semblance of order in this court...
Give us free. Give us free.
Keep crying out, give us free, or anything else.
Give us
I am trying to question this witness.
Give us free.
We have to want it like that. Give us free. Give us free. And here's the good news. It's available to each of us. As we grow, as we emulate Jesus, our way shower, as we come to understand other faiths and how we are more alike than apart, as we are willing to reconcile or make amends with others in our lives, no matter how they feel about it, as we're willing to do that, we start to gain our freedom. As we recognize that the Christ within us, God within us, the I am, is really in charge of our lives if we allow it to be so. Give us free. Give us free. Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. God bless.